Hi there, my name's Dan Jordan. I'm Concertmaster of the Sarasota Orchestra, and I'm here to talk to you today about string playing, specifically string playing in an orchestra. And since I have been the coach of the Youth Philharmonic, which is the top orchestra of the Sarasota Orchestra Youth Orchestra program for the last couple of decades, I thought I might be uniquely qualified to talk to you about string playing generally, orchestral etiquette, how you prepare for a rehearsal, how you look good during a rehearsal. The concert's the easy part, right? I mean, the concert's after all the work's been done, and that's when you just get to have fun. So this is more about what you do before that first rehearsal, in between rehearsals, and specifically also what has to happen when you're actually sitting in your chair and trying to be part of a string section, which is easier said than done. One might think that since the concertmaster gets all the glory, right, that we might have the hardest job. But I find that sitting particularly in the back of a string section, is one of the hardest things to do. And that's why it's never been a thought of mine that when you seat a string section, you put the worst players in the back, right? No, you want to have a great section that goes from front to back, because I think it's actually the hardest, the further back you go, to be able to hear what's said, to be able to play with the other sections of the orchestra, to play with the front of your section, to be able to interpret what the conductor's saying and showing with their beat. So it's not easy to do. And so we're going to talk for the next few minutes about some tips and tricks that might help you become a better section string player. And in so doing so, we'll also talk about some things that leaders need to do in a string section, because you need to be able to show the people in the section how to do certain things and lead by example. So you need to have learned your part better than anyone else. At least that's always been my philosophy. So let's get started. I thought I'd play you a little excerpt first of a piece that's very recognizable for a concertmaster. This is something from Scheherazade. And the reason I wanted to play that for you is because it's one of the things that we get to do in orchestra music, is we get to make music come to life. And that's an excerpt that comes to life in the form of a story. Scheherazade in 1001 Arabian Nights is the storyteller that has to leave cliffhangers of a story in order to stay alive, so that the Sultan will not kill her the next morning. And she manages to do that until the Sultan falls in love with her, of course. Very famous story, and it's the concertmaster gets to be the storyteller and gets to be Scheherazade, and so I get to start all of the tales off. And I thought it was a fun way to sort of bring you into this orchestra world, because ultimately that's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to impact people's lives and bring them into our world. So yeah, let's get started. And I want to first talk about what we do before the first rehearsal, right? How do we prepare? So we get our orchestra music in advance. Always important to get in advance if you can. You never want to be sight reading at a first rehearsal, because that's not going to make anybody look good or sound good. So you want to, first of all, get your music in advance. And then you want to, the first thing I like to do when I first open it is take a listen to what you're going to play. And you have such an advantage over when I was growing up because you have something called YouTube. You have a phone. And with your phone, for free, you can listen to the piece that you're going to play. Oh, I used to have to scrounge and find CDs, have to go to the record stores and search around. I remember joining CD clubs so I could try and accumulate orchestra music so that when I would have to learn a new piece, maybe I would have it or one of my friends would have it. So you have a huge advantage over what I had growing up. And so find a recording and listen to the piece that you are preparing with the music in front of you. That's really important. Have the music in front of you because if you don't, then you can get a sense of the piece. It's still good to listen to. You can put it on in the car. You can listen to it for fun. But it's really important that you listen to it with the part in front of you because you're going to be looking for certain things. You're going to be looking for what? Dynamics. You're going to be looking for tricky rhythms. You're going to be looking for all the pitfalls. And not even so much pitfalls. You're going to be looking for all the things that can make you look good in that first rehearsal. And my general rule of thumb is that I want to have spent enough time looking at a piece that I'm not glued to my part trying to figure out what I'm doing. So in other words, I want to be able to pay attention to what the conductor wants. I want to be able to pay attention to what the other people around me are doing rather than just focusing on myself. And there's a big difference there because if you are focused on your notes, the notes that you're playing, it's harder to listen, it's harder to watch. So I'd like to know, I mean, obviously you're not trying to memorize your orchestra part. That would be very time consuming and not practical. You're not trying to memorize anything. But there are certain places that I try and look for, which are places where it's important to look at the conductor. For instance, anytime there's a tempo change. Anytime there's a tempo change, it's a really good idea to look up and see what the conductor is showing. And the conductor tends to look at the orchestra during that time. So it's if he happens to see you looking up, again, it's another way to look impressive, especially at a first rehearsal, if you are the one that's paying attention to what the conductor's doing. Okay, so we've got the recording, right? We're going to listen to at least one recording, hopefully more than one. And what I like to do is get a tempo of the recording. So you're going to listen and have your metronome with you. And while you're listening to that recording, you are going to turn your metronome on and you're going to listen and find a speed. So we go to YouTube and let's listen to the beginning of a piece we all know. Normally, you might not have to do this if it was a piece you knew really well, but I thought it'd be more fun to listen to something that we already know. This is going to be the beginning of the Nutcracker. I think. I'm going to get my metronome. Hold on. I'm back. Okay, when you turn your metronome on, oh goodness. Oh goodness. I'm out of battery. Is this a, what you call a outtake? Why don't we just pretend that I'm listening? Is that 100 maybe? 100 to the quarter note? And then I would normally turn my metronome on and I would put the beat on. Tick, 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 tick. Right? And so you would learn a piece at the proper tempo. And this is not the way you would normally learn a solo piece, right? If you're working on a solo piece with your teacher, you're going to work it up slowly. And you might have to work up some of the things in orchestra slowly. But for the first rehearsal, you want to have it at tempo. It's not like a lesson where you might go in and not have something fully at speed yet, and that's okay at a first lesson of a solo piece. But for orchestra, you need to have it at tempo at that first rehearsal. Because again, you want to be that person that looks good, that knows what they're doing, and has it looking like performance ready at that first rehearsal. So why is it so important to look good? Why do I keep talking about looking good rather than sounding good? And this is an important distinction, right? You go to an orchestra concert, you're sitting in the audience, and who's going to catch your eye? It's that person that's sitting up straight, that has good posture, good bow hold, holds their violin up, just drooping down like this, and looks like they know what they're doing, right? Playing in an orchestra is at least 50% visual. I'd say it's probably more like 75% visual in terms of how you enjoy a concert. If you are listening to an audio recording, it's not as exciting as listening to a video and watching a video, right? So it's the same thing with an orchestra concert. If you close your eyes, you can let the sound wash over you, and that's a great experience. It can be a very moving experience. But I think one of the really exciting things is watching an orchestra. And so we, as section string players, have to distinguish ourselves as somebody interesting to watch. So that's why I'm going to keep talking about looking good in an orchestra section, because it's hard, right? We all want to be the leader. We all want to be the star. We want to be the soloist. We want to be the concertmaster. We want to be the principal. But there's only one of those per instrument. So we spend most of our lives, myself included, not getting to be the leader. I guess I don't spend most of my life doing that, but I have spent a lot of my life not being the leader. And what I've had to do was learn how to distinguish myself as a section player and be part of the team. And just like a sport, if you've played sports, just like any sort of club, if you can be part of a team that's really good and everybody's working together, you can do really amazing things, and it's a lot more rewarding. So I think it's a great thing to think of ourselves as part of that team as a section string player. We may not get the glory, but we can still distinguish ourselves, and we can still be part of something that's really, really wonderful. Okay, so we've started our preparation. We've looked at the tempo. Okay, number one is we've found out the tempo. And then number two, I like to listen to the recording and listen for, well, I think I mentioned this, tempo changes, but also the pitfalls of where I need to look up and where I really need to be paying attention. We can only have our brains and our ears firing at 100% for so long before we get tired. So, and there's lots of notes to play. So it's important that we know where it is that our brains and our ears have to really pay attention, and our eyes, so we can watch. So I like to look for those pitfalls. Where is there a rest that I could fall into and be the only one playing? That's the number one rule, right? We don't want to fall in rest and be the only one making a noise when everybody else is quiet. So where are those spots? And I look for those. I also try and look for things like dynamics. I think that's a really important thing to look for. You might be surprised, why haven't I talked about learning notes? Learning notes is actually one of the least important things you need to do before a first rehearsal. It's good to put fingerings in so you can, because you're going to have to be able to sort of follow along in the contour of the playing, but sometimes you're going to play orchestra music that's really hard and you may not be able to learn it all before the first rehearsal. And that's okay. That happens in a professional orchestra too. We may not be able to play all of it at once at the very beginning of a rehearsal process. So we want to learn rhythms and dynamics, and we have to look at all the things on the page, accents, and any sort of details that the composer might have given. Italian words, if there are some of those, or German words. Words in another language that you might not be able to interpret that are musical terms. It's really great if you can look them up before the first rehearsal and write them in your part, because there's nothing more satisfying than when a conductor says, or a section coach, as I like to do, says, does anybody know what this word means? And if you can be the one to raise your hand, that's a really great thing and will make you look good. Again, I'm using that term, looking good. You've gotten to the first rehearsal, you've done your homework, you've listened to the recordings, you've practiced your part, you know all the pitfalls, you've translated the musical terms, you've circled things, you've made sure that you know what the bowings are in the music. Hopefully there's bowings in the music. If there isn't bowings, oh, this is so important. I'm glad I remembered to talk about this. If there's no bowings in your part, get to rehearsal and look in the first chair's part, or ask the conductor or the section coach and say, what are the bowings here? Because there's nothing harder for an orchestra section that doesn't have bowings. You will waste so much time. So if you're a leader, if you're a principal string player, make sure there are bowings in their parts. If there aren't, then talk to somebody, talk to your coach, talk to your conductor, talk to your orchestra administrator, and say, what do I do? Because that's going to waste a ton of time in rehearsal that will be very annoying to the other instruments, who, particularly wind players, who don't have to have bowings in their parts. So I would definitely make sure that you know what you're doing in terms of the bowings. Because that's another thing that will make you not look good, is if everybody's going one direction and you're going the opposite direction. So it's really important that you have those marked in your part properly. Okay, so you get to rehearsal, and say the rehearsal starts at 2 o'clock. What time do you get there? Not 2 o'clock, right? We get there early. We get there much earlier than 2 o'clock. Certainly, those of you that are coming from school or have people that drive you, it's not easy to get there earlier than the rehearsal starts, but it is so important that you get there. I would say a good rule of thumb is to try and get there at least 15 minutes before the first rehearsal. And why do we have to get there early? For one thing, again, it makes you look good because you are sitting in your seat and focusing and preparing and warming up. And because these are muscles, right? Your fingers are muscles. So you have to get those muscles warm. It's just like warming up for an athletic event. You would not go out there and try and play a basketball game without having shot any baskets before the game. So it's the same idea with violin or any other instrument, string playing, wind playing. You need to have a few minutes to warm up. And also, you guys are all busy. I'm busy. We all have lives beyond what we do in an orchestra. So it's really important that you have time to clear your mind and focus on what's ahead of you. And there may be changes to the parts that you would then have a chance to mark in. You can look at the section leader's parts, see if you have any questions, see if there's anything that doesn't match. Okay, so you get there early, and then, I talk about this, I think, with every section that I've ever coached in all the years that I've been doing this. It drives me crazy. Have a pencil. Nothing is more frustrating to a conductor and a section coach when you're telling them all this stuff and people are just sitting there staring at you, not writing anything down. Because often, in a professional orchestra, we play the same music for the entire week and then we play the concerts. But for youth orchestras and school orchestras, you're working on the music for a long time, right? And you don't do it for just a week. You do it for several weeks, maybe even a couple of months. And you're not going to remember something that was said in October when you're rehearsing it in November. So have a pencil with an eraser that is sharpened and have it on your stand when the rehearsal begins. So important. And then another way to look really good is anytime the conductor says something that pertains to you and is looking at your section, pick up your pencil and mark it in. Even if it's something you think is obvious, even if it's something you think you would remember anyway, even if you think it's something that you don't even agree with. Mark it in, because the conductor will appreciate it, your section coach will appreciate it, your stand partner will appreciate it, and you'll be the one that remembers that the next time. And so when the conductor gets frustrated because nobody remembered what he said the previous week, you'll have done it, and you will, again, look good. So have a pencil, have a mute. I have a mute, and I have it on my violin ready to go. And then when you're sitting in orchestra, look engaged, sit up straight, have your violin or whatever your instrument you're playing in a way that makes you look like you know what you're doing. Position your chair and your body so that you can see not only the conductor but your section leader, because as we're going to talk about in a second, that's one of the things you need to do is watch your section leader to see what part of the bow they're in. Are they at the tip? Or are they in the middle? And whatever part of the bow the concertmaster's in or your section leader's in, that's the part of the bow you need to be in. Again, even if you don't agree with it, that's the part of the bow you should be in. What else do you want to be doing while you're in orchestra? So you're watching, we've talked about this, you're watching the conductor, you're watching the principal. Not all the time, but you know the spots where you need to look up, or you figure out the spots where you need to look up. If you're not matching something, you should notice if your bowing's wrong, you pay attention and you look in the stand in front of you, or you go up to the front at the break and you figure out why your bowing's wrong. So you have your radar going, your eye radar going, so that you notice when you're not matching what's happening visually. The other thing I think that's really worth talking about is what you do with your ears in an orchestra, because a lot of what we've talked about so far has been visual, right? What you look like, the impression that you give, how you can stand out visually. But ultimately what we're talking about in an orchestra is how we play together, how an orchestra sounds together. And this is where your ears come in. And listening in an orchestra section is so important. So what do you listen to? Are you listening to yourself? Well, yes, because your violin is under your ear, right? And you're going to hear what's coming out of it. You're listening to yourself, but that's not what's important, as you probably figured out. So what do you listen to? Well, it kind of depends on what your role is in the orchestra, and that's something that you have to figure out as you're going along, because it's not going to be the same. Just because you're a violinist doesn't mean you always have the melody. Just because you're a bass player doesn't mean that you always have the accompaniment. You have a different role that changes over the course of a piece, over the course of a section, over the course of a phrase sometimes. So it's really important that you know what to listen for, and the way to do that is to figure out what your role is. So let's just say, for an example, you do have the melody. So what are you listening for when you have the melody? For me, I listen for rhythm. I listen to who has the rhythm, because that's how I figure out how I play with somebody else. Okay, so what's the order of responsibility? You listen to yourself to make sure you're playing in tune, playing the right notes. And then you listen to your section. You listen to your stand partner, the people in front of you, behind you. You want to make sure that your section is cohesive and that you're contributing as a part of that cohesiveness. And then after that, this is the hard part, but the fun part is that you want to listen to important things around you. And you can't listen to everything. It's one of the great things about orchestra music is that it's so complex. There can be many different things going on, and it's impossible to hear all of them. But what I like to do is always have my ear on one ear on my section and one ear on somebody else's section, and I'll listen for things that sound interesting as the piece is going on. And if you have multiple rehearsals of a piece, which you usually do, I like to listen for different things the next time around. So who's playing the accompaniment here? Is there a second melody that's going on? What are the brass doing? What are the winds doing? What's the percussion doing? The percussion is always interesting to listen to because they will almost always, when they're playing, give you a rhythm to lock into. Listening for pitch, really important. You want to play in tunes because that's something that can really stick out if you're playing out of tune. So listening to colleagues, listening to your friends, your peers, your other orchestra mates is something really, really fun and important when you're playing in an orchestra. So I hope this has been helpful. How to be a good section player in an orchestra, how to be a good orchestral citizen. And I hope to see you next season at a Sarasota Orchestra concert, or consider joining our youth program. It's ages 8 to 21. We have ensembles on both Monday and Tuesday evenings. So all the best and take care.